Hey guys, how are you? Great, that's wonderful. I'm good too. Thank you for asking. Great to be here with you guys. Door Creek. It's been a long time since I was here in person. I spoke here in person a couple times. I was trying to remember how long ago that was, and I can't. And then I realized I turned 40 last November. I was like, well, I suppose that's kind of the way it goes, I hear. So anyway, thank you guys so much for having me out here. I know many of you didn't directly make the decision, but I'm really grateful. I've been out about every 2 years or so for different things. My wife Jessica has been out a couple times since we moved away. Back to Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm from. 5 years ago, actually 5 years ago next month, we'll have moved away. But this is our first time coming back with our kids. We have 2 little boys. And I'm an indulgent parent right now, showing strangers pictures of my children. But I'm biased, so what can I say? Roman on the left, he's 5.5, and he was born here in Madison, and he was 9 months old when we moved back to Portland. And then August has graced our lives with his presence, who's the 3-year-old right there. And that picture sums up many things. I don't have one picture of them both looking at me smiling directly. That's because that's literally an impossible feat to accomplish with two little boys. They're super energetic. They're so giving us a run for our money. But they're incredible humans to be able to live with and watch them develop. And so thank you. We came a couple days early, and we've just been seeing friends nonstop. And so thank you guys for the invitation to come and be with you. I was here this morning with a whole crew. Maybe some of you were here this morning. And we'd rock the history of the Bible for like 2.5 hours on a Saturday morning. The rest of you were watching cartoons, I guess. I don't know. But so cheers. So anyway, thanks. This is my idea of a good time, is to talk about the Bible with people. There's one interesting thing though about this trip, and it has to do with those 2 little guys. Most of the years that Jessica and I lived here, we lived here for 8 years total, we didn't have kids, we didn't have children. And so our lives in that season, we can now see, were marked by all kinds of things that we have no longer, like freedom and spare time and personal space and like margins. And that's been very clear to us, especially bringing them here for the first time. We got to show Roman the hospital he was born in and like the house that we brought him home to. He's never seen these places. And so that's been like kind of cool and magical. But also being here in a space where we lived so many years with freedom and personal space and time has made this last few days very different than any other time I've experienced Madison before. And it's been a vivid reminder of the season of life that we're in. We're parents of these very small little, what I've come to call them as drunken cavemen, is essentially how they behave. Just picture what that is like in your mind. And you've got most 3-year-olds described right there for you. Like super volatile and unpredictable. Their mood depends completely on sleep and diet, and they're just little balls of impulse. And so we brought them here, and we've been doing all the stuff that they think is boring, like going to friends' houses and talking for hours. And we've been pushing them, and they've been pushing back because of whatever, sleep, and we've been probably not getting them to bed on time enough. And this is the deal. We're parents of little kids. Anybody? Some of you are in this season. Some of you have been in this season. Some of you aren't in this season. You're wondering if it's really something you ever want. And I would urge you to really think seriously about that, because it's not easy. So with this trip, has just kind of been in a microcosm, though, what life is like living with drunken cavemen, which is these little humans enter your life, and they're so needy, and their limitations and their needs pretty much become the center stage for a long season. I hear it changes and will end in some way. Somebody please tell me that it will change, right? At some point. So that's really great. Yeah, that's right. But we're in the season where, especially when they enter your life as babies, their needs are the center stage. And rightly so. Like, they depend on their caretakers, their parents, for survival and food and all this kind of thing. But the challenge of raising little cavemen is both civilizing them, but also taking them on this journey. My responsibility as a parent is to introduce them to this cold, hard fact about the universe, that this universe that they inhabit doesn't actually revolve around them. And it's easy to not get that when you're a baby, right? Because when you are a baby, when you are a baby, the world kind of does revolve around you, at least for the people closest. You're with me here. And that's not necessarily bad, because your need to eat should be the main concern of one of your parents, And so the challenge of civilizing little cavemen, of raising kids, is introducing them to this hard fact, that the universe doesn't actually revolve around them, and that this season of them being and their needs being the center of everything actually is not going to last forever, and it's actually going to be changing every month and as every year goes by. And this trip has reminded me of that yet again, but I'm pretty much reminded of this every day of my life now, living with them, which is wonderful and challenging all at the same time. And this has been on my mind also, this difficult transition that we all went through, of realizing the universe doesn't revolve around us. It's a journey that we also all have to go through in our journey of following Jesus. It's very easy, and I found this for myself and being in years of pastoral ministry, finding that we all have this journey of many of us when we first come to Jesus or we come to God. For many, it's often connected to a season of need or crisis. And we discover the grace of Jesus, the good news about him. We discover a community of people. And that's true even for myself. I had a series of whatever constitutes a crisis for a 19-year-old. That's what I experienced. And it was really important for me in becoming a follower of Jesus then. But what's interesting is that when you begin to follow Jesus longer, it's actually very difficult to transition out of the baby mindset. It's very difficult to realize this actually needs to transition into an adult relationship, and that God's primary role in my life isn't actually to meet my needs in the way that I would always prefer or want. That's the journey a parent has to take a child on, to journey from a baby mindset to an adult mindset. That's the journey all of us have to go on, and it's the journey of the biblical character whose story we're going to reflect on for a little bit here tonight. It's the story of Gideon from the book of Judges. So I invite you to grab a Bible, turn one on, get out a Bible, do whatever you need to do, and go to the book of Judges in the Old Testament. Don't be ashamed if you need your table of contents, because it's just right in the thick of it, and it can be difficult to find. But the book of Judges. So you guys have started in, yes, I was here with you virtually via video back in January, and you're doing this read through the Bible and reading through the Old Testament. How's it going? Doesn't give me a lot of positive sense of what's happening in the room right here. So how's it going? It's hard, isn't it? Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult. The action is raging for the first 69 chapters until you get to Mount Sinai. And then the laws start coming, yeah? And the hundreds of laws. And then after that comes a lot of battles and blood and gore. And then welcome to the book of Judges. which is the bloodiest book of the whole Bible and the most violent book of the whole Bible. The role that it plays in the storyline of Israel is the same as that of tragic literature or tragic stories, like think in our culture, the epic Godfather trilogy, where you watch this is from the 1980s or 70s. The modern remake of it would be the grisly, like Breaking Bad TV series, where you watch an individual or a family make horrible choices and descend into madness and self-destruction. Right? And you're like, why would I want to read a story like that? But tragic literature has always had a very important role in many different cultures, and it plays an important role in the Bible. These become character studies in people you never want to be like. And that's very important, to actually have those kinds of stories in your mind. And as we meet these characters in the book of Judges, they're usually a mixed bag. They tend to go from okay to bad to worse to never, ever get in a room with this kind of person, like that kind of thing. Once you get to Samson, he's horrible. But we're going to look at Gideon, the story of Gideon, and he's very much a mixed bag. But what we learn is through his experience, someone who's on the journey of growing up, of realizing that his relationship with God means that God doesn't revolve around him and his needs in the ways that he would prefer. So just to kind of put it on the map, so just here we are. We're in the book of Judges. We had Abraham who journeyed, out of Babylon and land of Ur. He had a big family. They were enslaved. They were let my people go. You've seen the movie, probably, the Exodus, something. So they went out of slavery to Mount Sinai. They were there for a year, 10 Commandments, 603 more after that. And then they wander through the wilderness. Joshua leads them into the promised land. And here we are. We're in the period of the Judges. And this is not the period of the kings like Solomon or David or any of those guys. And it's also before the period of where they get kicked out of the promised land. We're in the period where all of the tribes exist like this federation of tribes in the land that was promised to Abraham. So, I love maps, so I'm just going to show you one because it's helpful. But so here you go. So here's roughly, once the people of Israel go in and Joshua allots the tribes of Israel, all their different boundaries, here you go. This is the makeup of the people. They're on both sides of the Jordan River, which flows between those two bodies of water, right there in the center. Dead Sea below, the lake, the Sea of Galilee up above. And the book of Judges takes place on this stage. And essentially how the book of Judges begins is, dear reader, nobody's following the God who saved Israel out of slavery anymore. The whole book of Judges, it's like a hamster wheel of sin and unfaithfulness that the people of Israel are on. And they're constantly forgetting God. And so what God allows is to have their neighbors on their territories, all of these ites, the Midianites and the Edomites and the Moabites and so on. And so God allows them to face the tragic consequences of their stupid decisions. And so every time the people of Israel start worshiping other gods, this is the book of Judges, it just happens over and over again, he allows one of these ites to come invade their land. And that's where we pick up the story here in Judges chapter 6. Sorry, I didn't tell you that. Judges chapter 6 is where we're looking. And we'll just let the story unfold. How you guys doing? Okay. Judges chapter 6. First sentence. So again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and it's a fixed phrase by now. You know what that means in the book. It means they start giving their allegiance to the gods of the Canaanites, Baal or Asherah or something. And for 7 years, he gave them into the hands of the Midianites, who were a people group down in the southeast. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts and caves and strongholds. It's like a run for the hills type of situation. Now, whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites and Amalekites and other eastern peoples would invade their country. They would camp on the land, ruin the crops all the way down to Gaza, that's down in the south. They didn't spare a living thing for Israel, either sheep or cattle or donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like locusts, these soldiers and armies all over the land. It was actually impossible to count the soldiers and their camels. They invaded the land, they ravished it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites, they cried out to the Lord for help. Now, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove all of these nations out from before you. I gave you their land, and I said, I'm the Lord your God. Don't worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you haven't listened to me." And that's the end of what the prophet says. And then the story goes on, and you're kind of like, dang, that's kind of harsh. But if you've been reading through the story so far, this is it's actually a really fitting tone for God to take, yeah? How many times are they going to go on the hamster wheel of unfaithfulness? And so the people are crying out to God, and there's this really intense kind of prophetic rebuke of the people and their unfaithfulness. And then the speech of the prophet is over, and you're just sitting there going, oh, okay, maybe God's over this. Would God be justified in finally just backing out of this whole commitment to the family of Abraham thing? Can you sympathize with God wanting to finally be frustrated and back out of this relationship? Yeah? I mean, how many times would you wait for somebody on the unfaithfulness hamster wheel, right? 5 times? 77 times? Right? Like Peter asked Jesus? Or like, how long do you wait? How long will God wait? The next story. Now, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under this oak tree in Ophrah, not Oprah, Ophrah. This oak tree belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and it's where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. This is classic Old Testament storytelling style, where, right, the story opened up and the narrator was like the movements of nations, right? So Israel unfaithful and these Midianites come in, right? It's this cosmic battle of nations at work. And you're like, what's going to happen? Oh no. And then the prophet, and it's really intense. And then the next story is just, now this angel went and sat under a tree by this guy. And you're like, what does that have to do with anything, right? I want to know about, right, the drama of the nations. What? This is great. This is classic stuff. And it just leaves you thinking somehow this angel talking to a guy under a tree has something to do with this bigger story happening among the nations. And it does. What's the guy's name? Gideon, which in Hebrew means hacker. Hacker. No, not computer hacker, because they didn't have computers. Well, with an axe. Hacker. And that's relevant to a thing that's going to happen in the story. And what is he doing? What's Gideon doing? He's threshing wheat in a wine press. Now, you might just read over that, but that's supposed to stick out to you. That's a really relevant detail. It's supposed to stick out to you. So here you go. Here's one. Here's an ancient Israelite wine press. It was discovered in the ruins of ancient Israelite city down in the southern desert of modern Israel. So a wine press is you get all the grapes and you throw the grapes in and you tromp them down, it's the bare feet, you get all purple feet party, that kind of thing. And but you can see like the juice all drains down into that thing in the center, and then you get the pulp and all that, and you scoop all that out, and then you get the wine out. Now, but he's not making wine down there. He's not stomping grapes. What's he doing? He's threshing wheat. Now, threshing wheat, I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't grow up anywhere close to a farm. So I've had to learn all this from dictionaries and stuff. So some of you have maybe actually done it before. I don't know. So threshing wheat is where you're doing something to crush the kernels of wheat and crush them and force them out of the husk, their little shell. And you usually do it in an open place where there's wind Because after the kernel of wheat comes out of the shell, what's left? What's the shell? It's chaff. It's really light. And what you want is an open place where the wind, where you get your some kind of threshing floor or a threshing sledge or fork, and the wind blows it away, and you have the kernels left. So this is the equivalent of saying, like, Gideon was he was making sushi in a meat locker. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what? That's not the place where you do that. You know? That's actually the opposite of kind of place. You don't want the sticky rice to get cold in the freezer. That doesn't make... It's a difficult situation. I could have just said that, but anyway. So the whole point is that, like, this is a difficult situation he's in. So the angel, this is verse 12, sorry, back to the story. The angel of the Lord appeared to Hacker, Gideon, and he said, "The Lord's with you, mighty warrior." "But sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Didn't the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us, and he's put us into the hand of Midian." Now just pause right there. So get into the mindset. Is Gideon and are his people in a difficult circumstance, a difficult hardship in their life as a people? Yes. They're in danger. Their lives are in danger. Their livelihoods are in danger. Like, just imagine, this is like crisis, national crisis. But notice the conclusion that Gideon draws about God's character from his circumstances. Do you see that? So, because he says, "The Lord's with you." And what is Gideon's reply? No, he's not. No, he's not with us. He's abandoned us. And how do I know that he's abandoned us? My life is really hard right now. So Gideon has a vision of his life. Gideon has a vision of what he needs and what he wants. And it doesn't involve the Midianites, like stealing, right, from his farm. And in his mind, the role that God plays in his life, clearly, is to meet his needs on his terms and to prevent anything bad from ever happening to him. Do you see that right there? That's clearly his assumption about who God is to him. As if he's a baby, and if God's his helicopter parent, right? Just waiting to rescue him from every difficult circumstance. And it forces you as a reader to think like, but has God abandoned his people? Well, I don't think so. Like, everything in the story is going to say the opposite. But it does raise the question of maybe what God's doing in this story is taking Hacker on a journey of growing up, of realizing that the universe and that God doesn't revolve around him and his crises and his needs. And the fact that God has allowed this very difficult situation doesn't mean that God isn't with him. It doesn't mean that God's abandoned him. It might mean that Gideon's being taken on the difficult process of having to grow up and relate to God in an adult way and realize that God isn't playing the role of the genie in the bottle. God's promise is to be with him, not to rescue him out of every difficult situation. Let's keep reading. So the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "But Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh." It's one of the tribes. "And I'm the least in my family." The Lord answered. What's his question? How can I save Israel? And what's the Lord's answer? I will be with you. Second time. And you'll strike down the Midianites altogether. So then Gideon replied, okay, angelic appearance of the God of Israel appearing to me under a tree, that's actually not quite enough. If I have found favor in your eyes, how about you give me a sign? do a magic trick. That it's really you talking to me. Please, don't go away until I come back. I'm going to bring my offering and set it here in front of you. And so the Lord said, I don't have time for this. We've got a nation to save. What is God's response? Okay. I'll wait right here if you want me to do a magic trick. Maybe you didn't see that one coming, right? You thought maybe like the Lord's kind of be like the stern parent who's on a mission to teach Gideon. And the Lord is on a mission to teach Gideon to grow up. But look at, it's as if the Lord is adapting his parenting techniques. And he can discern there are some times where you need to step back as the parent and let them learn the difficult lesson and let them sit in the mess that they've made for themselves, because they need to learn how to do that and wade through that as they become an adult. But there are other times where the parent needs to get involved and just accommodate and just adapt. There are some times where my 5-year-old will scream, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and I run in, and he's like, "The guy's Lego head won't come off," and I'm just like, dude, I thought your finger was cut off, by the tone of your voice. Like, you can't do that. But then there are other times, this happened 3 weeks ago, there are other times where I'll hear him screaming, "Daddy, Daddy," and I run it into the backyard, and he's dangling from the treehouse. He had kicked out the ladder accidentally as he was getting down, and I'm really glad I ran to him. You know what I'm saying? You adapt. And that's exactly like, what else is God doing here? Okay, whatever you want me to do, you can make me a little meal. And so Gideon went in and prepared a young goat. And from an ephah of flour, he made bread without yeast. And he put the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot. And then he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. It's a strange little story. The angel of God said to him, "Why don't you take the meat and the unleavened bread and place them on this rock, and then pour out the broth." So now you have this soggy bread and meat on the top of a rock. What? Then Gideon did so, and then with the tip of his staff in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the bread. And fire flared up from the rock and consumed the meat and the soggy bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. Whoa, what? Are you with me? If you've been looking for a sign, that. What else would you want to be looking for? When Gideon realized it was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Sovereign Lord, holy cow, I just saw the angel of the Lord face to face." And the Lord said to him, "Shalom, peace. Don't be afraid. You're not going to die." So Gideon built an altar. He called it, "The Lord is Shalom." And it's still there to this day in Ophrah, not Oprah, of the Israelites. How you guys doing? So the Lord is going to grow Gideon up, but there are moments where God will also accommodate him and meet him on his level. And okay, you need a magic trick? Let's do that, if that's what you need in this moment. And God meets him right there, right, in his inadequacy and his need. What he goes on, just for sake of time, we can't read the next story, but it's the story of how he earns the name Hacker. He goes and he chops down the altars to Baal, the god of the Canaanites around him, and he puts up an altar to the God of Israel. Pick up the story here down in verse 33. Now all the Midianites, the Amalekites, the other eastern peoples, they joined forces, they crossed over the Jordan, they camped in the valley of Jezreel. I'm in verse 34. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon. He blew a trumpet. He summoned the Abiezrites. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh. He called them to arms, to Asher, to Zebulun, to Naphtali. They too went up to meet him. Yeah? He's got an army. He's empowered by God's Spirit. He's got soldiers. We're going to do this. I've got my sign in my pocket, right? Full of faith, courage, supposedly. Then Gideon said to God, "Now, if you're going to save Israel by my hand, just as you promised, can we do that sign thing again? Can I place a wool fleece on the threshing floor? And if in the morning, if the dew is only on the fleece, but all the ground around it is dry, then I'll know that you're going to save Israel by my hand, just like you said." You're like, what, was the fire consuming soggy bread not enough? Like, was that, yeah? Gideon woke up the next morning and that's what happened. He squeezed out the fleece and he wrung out the dew and there was a bowl full of water. Holy, second son. Then Gideon said to God, please don't be angry with me. Can I just make one more request? Allow me one more test. And you're like, dude. Right? Well, okay. If what you're thinking is this guy, right? If you're feeling a little superior to him right now, you're falling into the trap that the narrator has set for you because you think that you wouldn't be like this too if you were in these circumstances and then you realize you're a total hypocrite, right? That kind of thing. This time, this test, let's make the fleece dry and have all the ground be covered with dew. And you would think, right? If this was me and my kids, my patience would be over at this point, right? But then look what God does. That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry and the ground covered with dew. So God calls Gideon. He allows him to sit in a very difficult circumstance. And Gideon's assumption is God's asleep at the wheel. He's abandoned us. And so God meets Gideon in his moment of need, his moment of insecurity. And just like a parent swooping in to rescue their kiddo and accommodate to their, that's exactly what we see God doing. He's gracious. He doesn't have to do any of this, but that doesn't matter. He apparently loves Gideon and he's committed to him. Now watch, just watch. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that's a name that he earned from the earlier story, that is Gideon, hacker, he and all of his men were camped at the spring of Harod. Now the camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And the Lord said to Gideon, you've got way too many soldiers for me to deliver Midian into their hands. In order that Israel may not boast against me, that her own strength saved her, hey, why don't you just send out a memo to all of the soldiers? Anyone who's afraid, just go home. Leave Mount Gilead. And so 22,000 men left, and 10,000 stayed. Now, God was your buddy yesterday. He was accommodating, meeting your every need. How are you feeling today about your life if you're an army captain? Are you with me? This is not good. This is actually really, really bad, right? There's innumerable soldiers, and you just lost 22,000, and God did it on purpose. But then the Lord said to Gideon, yeah, that's still way too many soldiers. So why don't you go down to the water and I'm going to sift them for you there. And if I say this one goes with you, he'll go. And if I say that one, no, he's not going to go. No, he won't go. So Gideon took the men down to the water, and there the Lord told him, would you separate those who lap the water with their tongues, those who plunge their heads right into the water like a dog? Separate those from those who kneel down and scoop up the water and then drink it from their hands. So 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. Everybody else just plunged their heads into the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, okay, these 300, that's who I'm going to use to give the Midianites into your hands. All of these other thousands, they'd have to go home right now. So Gideon sent the rest of them home to their tents, and he's got 300. How you doing? Yesterday, God accommodated your every need. Today, he's driving a hard bargain. And you might be tempted, if you're Gideon, to go back and be like, what? God, why are you abandoning me? But if he's honest, he knows that God hasn't abandoned him. What he's being taken on is the difficult process of growing up, right? Into an adult relationship. And what God is going to do in Gideon's life, sometimes God will meet him precisely on his terms and his timing. But then there are other times that God will bring Gideon into very stressful, difficult circumstances. And he would be tempted to think, God is not with me. God has abandoned me. But is it possible that precisely the opposite is happening? Is it possible that God's greatest priority isn't to solve all of our problems? Is it possible that God's greatest priority is to shape deep roots of character and patience and hope and trust in his people? Which means, like a wise parent, there are times when he'll dive in and solve the problems, and there are other times where he'll stand back, and there are other times where he will take Gideon on a hard journey to shape him. Anybody? Anybody? I wish these stories were relevant to our time and place. Now, for the sake of time, you're going to go on. If you haven't, in the reading plan, have you already read the story yet? Okay, so you're going to. I'm going to let you finish the story. I just wanted to set the table right here. God's going to deliver the Midianites into Gideon's 300. Well, actually, here's what he's going to do. Gideon and his 300 are going to defeat an army, an innumerable army, with what? With horns and empty clay pots and torches. And they're never even going to draw a sword. And you just got to read the story. It's an epic story. The enemy slaughters themselves down in the valley while they're blowing horns up on the hills. And I guarantee you that was not what Gideon had planned. And so in the end of the story, there is a resolution, but it's not what Gideon had planned. It's not the resolution Gideon wanted or had arranged for himself. And what he had to go through to reach that point, it was a very stressful, difficult circumstances. At some point, God met his needs. At other points, God stood back. And what we're watching here is an adult relationship, apparently, with God. And so here's the question I think the story puts to us. As we sympathize with Gideon, we're called in this story to reflect on our own journey, to reflect on our own lives. Are you in a season right now where you feel like God is distant? And I think we're forced to ask ourselves, why do I feel that way? If I feel that way because I'm in difficult circumstances and God's not doing what I'm asking God to do, it's time to get really honest, I think, and say, why do I think that God is obligated to solve all my problems? Is it possible that he's with me even though he's not solving my problems? Is it possible that God's agenda for my life involves much, much more than just my life going better and always going easy? And that's a very difficult set of questions to be forced to ask yourself. Some of you are in very difficult circumstances, I'm certain. Some of you have people you love and care about that are in very difficult seasons, and you're tempted to doubt God's character. But is it possible that God's up to something bigger, and that God's in this for the long haul, and that he's doing something else in your life and in the lives of those that you care about? And that's, I think, the question that this story puts to us. And ultimately, the God who's revealed in this story is the God who is not only going to just be with his people, he's the God who's going to completely identify with the pain and the suffering and the difficulty of his people in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, where God will take into himself the tragedy and the pain of the human condition and allow it to overwhelm and kill him, to overcome it by his resurrection, which is God's statement of life and love for our world. And if you believe that that's the God you're in a relationship with, it forces you to grow up. It forces you to rethink how you interpret every difficult season of your life. And so I don't presume to be able to make that type of analysis of your life for you. Jesus is the big boy. The Holy Spirit can help you do that. And so I'm just going to close in a word of prayer, and we're going to reflect and worship. And I just encourage you to hear this story and allow it to put the question to you about how you understand your own life and your own difficult challenges that have come your way in the past, in the present, or in the future. Let me close in a word of prayer. Jesus, thank you for this powerful story. Thank you for the gift of the scriptures that are so honest about the human condition, that are so honest about our doubts and our struggles to trust you and to follow you. Jesus, we want to believe that you are eternally committed to us with your life and with your love. And sometimes it's difficult for us to feel that and to discern your love at work. And so I pray that by your Spirit, you give each person here wisdom and greater courage to trust you, to trust that you are with us, even when you do not answer our prayers the way we want you to and do not solve our problems. Thank you for your eternal commitment to us through your life and your death and your resurrection and the gift of your Spirit that was for us, Jesus. And so we receive that and we sing and pray as people of hope. And we do so in the name of Jesus. Amen? Amen. Thanks for the chance to be with you guys.